Hello and welcome to the Grove Church Podcast. I'm Charlie Lofton, the lead pastor there, and we are so glad that you're joining us. Whether you are a member and you're just catching up on a sermon that you missed, or you're someone who's brand new, we are really glad that you are joining us. And if you are new in some way, and I know that a lot of people will do that, will listen to sermons first before they visit, I want you to know that we would love to meet you at any point. You can join us live in our services on Sunday, 9 and 10:30, or our streaming service at 10:30. Either way, we would love to be able to get to know you. And regardless of why you are here listening to this sermon today, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, good morning. If you are new, I'm Charlie. I'm the lead pastor here, and really glad you are worshiping with us today. And as Mark mentioned a few minutes ago, we are in a series. We're just kind of talking about, hey, what does the Bible say about different topics? And today we are talking about politics. That's fun. And I would like to, first of all, acknowledge that I am choosing the most cowardly time of the season to do it. There's no election coming up. We didn't just have an election. I mean, we got 18 months away. And we've had this president long enough now where kind of all that's settled down. So I'm choosing the easiest time to talk about it. So you're welcome. And it's been interesting. Some people knew about this already, because we talked about it or they've heard about it. Some people just aren't here today. So shout out to them. Other people mentioned to me they may not come to small group tonight, depending on what happens over the next 30 minutes. We'll just see how it goes, because there really are. We just have a lot of emotions tied up in this. And I think there's this fear, right, that somehow that 15 years of Charlie not talking about politics, like I've got 15 years, I'm just going to come at you with just both barrels of it. Because we live in a world, here's why I think we're anxious. We live in a world, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, where everyone who is good and smart agrees with you politically. I don't know if you knew that. I mean, it's just true, right? And so if you and I talk, right, we're going to talk about politics, and you find out that I don't agree with you, be like, I thought Charlie was informed. He's clearly not. And so then you're going to tell me things that you think I don't know. I'm like, yeah, well, I've heard that, but this. You're like, oh, he still didn't quite hear me, because if he just knew this, he's a smart person, he's a good person. He doesn't know, so I will tell him. And then if I don't agree with you, it's like, whoa, man. I didn't know Charlie was evil. That was tough to learn today. And I think there's a sense of which, because there is just kind of all of this, that there's a fear that somehow I'm going to not only just disagree with you, maybe even strongly disagree with you. And that's going to put us at odds, because that is the culture we live in. If you do not agree with me in some way, you are my enemy. And I don't want you as an enemy. You don't want me as an enemy. So something's going to happen. But I think what we're going to talk about today is, it's less about, and I'm significantly less concerned about the different political conclusions that you have come to, as opposed to, are we representing Jesus well out there? Right? Are we being who God has called us to be, specifically in this arena? Because I think one of the things that frustrates me is that there's just a lot of convenient usage of the Bible, right? I have a Bible verse when it matters, and I show this to you, and I see the Bible says this, and you find some verse, and unfortunately, a lot of times I see when somebody uses a verse, like you clearly don't know what that verse means, and you don't know the context in which it exists, but you feel like it's some giant weapon that can be used, and we use the Bible like a weapon, and we ignore the Bible when it is inconvenient. And really, it's like our political affiliation and political opinions and who I am as a Christian, they overlap when it's convenient for me, as opposed to really just kind of taking the role seriously of who is God calling me to be, not just generally in the world, but specifically when it comes to how I live and interact and engage in this particular aspect of society. And so in 2 Corinthians 5, Paul uses, I would say, a political metaphor, a political imagery to describe who it is we are supposed to be. And so I think for our purposes, as we kind of think, who am I supposed to be in this world? And then based on that, how do I come to the conclusions on these different political issues? I think this is a very helpful launching passage for us. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, starting in verse 18. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting people's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. So at least 5 times in a short number of verses, Paul uses the word reconcile or reconciliation. It's just kind of all over this. So make sure we understand what he means by this, because it matters for this passage. Being reconciled or reconciliation, it's, two things are at conflict and they need to bring them together. So you can, people talk about reconciling a bank account. Like how much money I thought I have is in conflict with how much money I actually have. And I need to reconcile these two things. But in a relational context, it's a conflict, right? These people are in some sort of conflict and they need to be reconciled, brought back together. And so what he's saying is that it is important for us to be reconciled to God. And he says, this is what Jesus came to do. There's a problem between people and God, and Jesus came to reconcile us. He doesn't want us to be in a situation where our sins continue to be held against us, is what he says, right? So he doesn't want sins being held against, so he came to reconcile. That was the ministry that Jesus did on the cross, of kind of bringing us back to God in good relationship. So this is what he's talking about. And he says, and in that regard, you are Christ's ambassadors. And so again, that is a political term, a political role, and intentionally used here, and I think is an incredible illustration. And I think it is important for us to put our mind around this, because the way that I want to say it is that our primary role in this world is to be Jesus' ambassador. That is our primary political role. Who am I? Who am I supposed to be politically? Well, politically, my first role and responsibility is to be Jesus' ambassador. So the metaphor is pretty clear. You are from another place, and the leader of this place has placed you here in order to represent his mission and his values. And so you are Jesus Christ's ambassador. So that means that really, as far as the way that I mentally think about who I am a citizen of Jesus' realm. And Jesus has told me that where I live, I represent him. So I live in this country. I interact almost exclusively with people from this country. And my role is to represent Jesus' values and to do that well. And so, as you think about who you are politically, what you believe, the ways in which you advocate for it, the way that you conduct yourself both online and in person, the media that you consume, the way that you put that media back out into the world, I want to ask this question, and I hope it can be for you a deep, thought-provoking question, which is this: how are you doing representing Christ? It's a little bit like the question I asked last week. We talked briefly about social media. Social media in and of itself being, it has no moral quality at all. It is just a thing. It is just a device. It's just a network. But the question was, the way that you use it, is it good for you? So in the same way, when I say, are you representing Christ well in this world, I'm not talking about whether or not you party too hard, say too many curse words, or even we talked about last week, are you watching shows that are inappropriate? Are you generally a good person? That's not what I mean. I mean specifically in the context in which we're talking about. do you, in your political role, and when you engage in that aspect of the world, both in what you believe and how you behave, do you believe that you are representing Jesus Christ well? When someone comes across you and they are talking to you, do they walk away saying, that's one of Jesus's people? I can tell. I can tell by what they advocate for and the way that they do it. That's one of Jesus's people. Or when we do this, do people walk away and think that you are just one among many? Just one more person adding a little bit more outrage, a little more anger, a little more divisiveness, a little more shallow thinking into a world that has all the shallow thinking and anger and outrage that it can have and more. Or when they see you, they think, that person represents Jesus. And so the role is ambassador, but he also makes it very clear what the mission is. He says, you are ambassadors for Christ. As though God were making his appeal through us, we implore you on Christ's behalf to be reconciled to God. So you're his ambassador, and he is making his appeal through you. And he's saying, this is it. I implore you, will you choose to be reconciled to God, to allow this thing that Jesus did for you? Will you allow that to draw you into a relationship with God? That is the mission that he has given us. And so our primary mission, this is our primary role as ambassador. Our primary mission is helping people be reconciled to God. That's the primary mission. Now, Jesus could send his ambassadors any number of places to do any number of things, the way that any number of ambassadors we have right now. You can imagine, you think, I'm going to be really cool to be an ambassador. Yeah, maybe, depending on where I sent you. Right? The ambassador to Switzerland, that sounds like a great idea. Like, I want to be ambassador to Switzerland. It's a fun place, and I can't imagine that it gets too stressful, which would be very different than, say, the ambassador to Israel or Ukraine or Russia, places that are currently experiencing a violent conflict of some sort. To be the ambassador to a country there, that's a different job. Ambassador to China, that's a job, right? That's not as much about violence as it is about economic policy, trade policy, tariffs, those sorts of things. Western Europe's kind of, you're ambassador there, you're in a place where maybe you fit in a little bit more, but your mission there is to kind of communicate this message and try to get them on board with this strategy that you've got with these other places. Countries in Northern Africa or the Middle East versus countries maybe in the southern part of Africa. I mean, all of these missions are going to be different, but the values in the person that you represent remain the same. Jesus has given us a very specific mission. That your primary mission is to help people understand their need to be reconciled to God. And what I want you to hear me say is that is very, very different than it is your job as Jesus' ambassador to get people who do not follow Jesus to follow Jesus' moral code. You think, I don't know that I caught that. Don't worry, I'm going to say it about 5 more times. There's a group of people out here and they don't know Jesus. And you represent Jesus to them. And it says it is your primary job to help them know, experience, learn about who Jesus is so that they can be reconciled to God through Jesus. So in the things that I communicate, in the way that I treat them, in the way that I talk about them, in the way that I just conduct myself generally in the world, my goal is to move them from unreconciled to God to reconciled to God. That is my job. And then once we're over here with each other, now we talk about, are we living well for Jesus? Do we follow and live the lives that Jesus has called us to? My job is to not tell people who do not know Jesus that they should live like Jesus anyway, and to construct some sort of restraints around them that force them to do that. This is a little bit what we talked about last week, a rule-based approach to life. I'm not trying to get these people to follow a certain set of rules. I'm trying by what I say and how I live to help them understand their need for Jesus and for them to know and embrace this message. So in what I say, what I do, how I act, my attitude, it is all about this. This is the primary. In order to do that primary well, there's certain ways that I need to behave, certain ways I need to act, especially in the political realm. And so over the years, I joked about me bringing this up at a cowardly time. I assure you there have been many times over the 15 years that our family has been here that I have been called a coward. That it is cowardly for me to not take strong stances publicly on all of these issues. And that if I had stronger moral character and I was willing to more, quote, take a stand, I would take stands on these issues. Let me just tell you, what you're asking, I wish you took a stronger stance on issues 2 through 10. Issue number 1, we have and will always take a strong stand on this. People need Jesus. Jesus is the primary answer to the most significant questions that the world is asking. And no matter how good a person you are, no matter your political background, no matter your religious background, your ethnic background, your socioeconomic, everyone needs Jesus. And without Jesus, you are hopeless in this life and the next. And we take a strong stance on that. And if I believe, I'll tell you this is what I believe, you can disagree, churches and people all over do, that if I take a strong stand in 2 through 10 such that it distracts from number 1, then I won't do it. And if by me taking a strong stand, I am going to limit myself to the number of people that will hear me pleading for them to be reconciled to God through Jesus Christ, then I'm going to limit that. It is not that I do not have. I mean, you can test me sometime if you would like. Come to me with some obscure political issue that matters to you and just see if I do not have a well thought out stance on that. I do. I have them. But again, if we currently live in a world where me making a strong stance about that is going to make me, again, evil or dumb to approximately 40% of the population, I'm just not going to, because it can be a distraction. It can become a distraction for the primary, especially in my role. My role, my job up here, find Jesus, and once you find him, live like him. And I don't want these things. And again, it's not that they're not important. They're maybe the 2nd through 10th most important things. But there's a big gap between 1 and 2 for me. And I would like to suggest, and you can take this and process it all you would like, that I believe that extends to you. That if you are allowing your association and the way that you talk and think about these things, if they have become so big that it has become a distraction here, then there's a problem. We can't let the secondary things prevent us from the primary. And so I ask you this question, semi-rhetorically, because I guess I have already sort of answered it. What would you say is the most important issues that Americans face right now? What would Jesus say is the answer to that question? And as his ambassador, are you keeping in line with those priorities? He would say, I believe the most important issue that Americans face today is whether or not they have hope in this world and the next and have experienced the reconciliation that comes from Jesus. That's the primary. But as I was talking to Kurt, who runs the slides back there and puts them in for me, he was like, man, you know what? This would be a great opportunity for open mic night. Right? And this is like, hey, what do you think the most important issue facing America is? Pass the mic around, just see what happens. It would be great. We would remember, and we would remember next Sunday when no one was here. But like, here's the thing. Like, here's the thing I want you to know. There is an outrage cycle out there. I'll tell you what the most important issue is. What the most important issue is, and depending on what week or month it is, well, I'll tell you right now, it's how we're going to treat people who have entered the country illegally. That is the most important issue. And depending on which side you're on, you've got really strong. Say, if we don't figure that out, it is whether or not we have gone too far in accommodating people from other races and religions and hiring processes and getting into schools, DEI, right? That's the most important issue. A hot minute ago, it was tariffs, right? Before that, it was whether or not transgendered people should be able to choose bathrooms or play in certain sports. And it just depends. You turn on the news and someone tells you the thing that you should be the most outraged about in this particular, it's the most important. It is. And the thing is it's constantly cycling. Fast forward to a different administration, right? Inflation. And then also, why are we letting all these people in? And then for this really random window, it wasn't just inflation, it's eggs. Eggs. I mean, the number of posts or things that you'll say talking about the price of eggs, and anecdotally what egg price you paid yesterday at whatever grocery store you go to. You're getting pulled into something. You're getting pulled into something. And all of that, I think, unfortunately, distracts us from the primary. And again, what I'm about to say, I got to drop at least a hot take or two on you. That was kind of hot. I got to do this too. I'm neither endorsing or condemning this. I just want you to identify something. That the current administration is using that outrage cycle to his strategic advantage. Because you can't keep up with what you're supposed to be outraged by. He is changing and pivoting from this to this to this to this to this. And by the time you've processed this one thing that he's done, and you've built up the appropriate outrage for it, or energy for it, right? By the time you've gotten there, we're on to something else. And we don't remember the thing that we were outraged about 2 weeks ago that is still happening, and you can't keep up. It's overload. Which is to say, just another great example of what if you chose to step outside of that. Now, so Charlie, all those issues are important. I'm not saying they're not important. I am saying two things. One, it is not the most important thing. And I'm also saying sometimes we get confused with what they say is urgent and what by values is truly important. And I believe that we are allowing ourselves and our emotions and our priorities to be dictated by groups of people who are just not completely aligned with the priorities that the leader of our realm, for whom we are an ambassador, what he has told us the priorities are. This is our primary, and with respect to these, you need to have an opinion, but even in the way that you think about these, and certainly in the way that you interact about them, do not allow that to keep you from this. Because we live, and again, I don't think this is something that necessarily Paul would have been able to fully conceive of, regardless of, the early Roman attempts at having a republic. I don't think a fully representative democratic republic that we live in was necessarily even conceived of. And so while we are an ambassador, we also hold citizenship here. And as a thoughtful citizen here and a representative of Jesus, I think it is important. I understand all of these things, and I have thought out positions on them, and then I vote accordingly. And there's a word that we use. We use it in connections, which is our opportunity to kind of get to know newer people, help them know a little bit about our church, and we kind of express some different values. And one of them is thoughtful. And by thoughtful, we don't mean I remembered that it was your birthday and I got you a gift. It's more thoughtful in the sense of we recognize that issues are more complex than very often the world makes them out to be. And so my challenge to you as you think about not just how to behave in all of this, and I need to behave well where I represent Jesus. I need to keep the mission primary. Well, but how do I navigate these things? I mean, my biggest thing would be to say is to choose thoughtfulness. You choose thoughtfulness, right? I really am less interested in your conclusions than I am the processes by which and the value systems by which you determine what it is you believe. Because taking the moral code that Jesus has given us and converting that into good political policy is a lot more complicated. But very often, sometimes we kind of get pulled into really simplistic thinking. We have one or two issues that are really, really important to us. And because they are of great importance, these two things remain for me. And I found a political party that also values these two things. And so I tend to vote with them. And so, therefore, because now I have chosen this team, I'm now obligated to believe all the things this team believes, which is in a completely overly simplistic way of approaching, because you're already on a team. I've already got a team. I'm on this team. I'm on Jesus' team. And maybe this is the best place for me to vote, but on every issue, it does not matter to me what the team says. It matters what my team says. And so I want to be thoughtful about it. And I would like to share kind of like three questions for you to consider as you're choosing to be thoughtful about this. The first one is this: what does God call his people to? What does God call his people to? On this issue, whether it be generosity, sex and sexuality, race relations, the welcoming of people from other countries, what has God called you to do? What has God called you to do? How you are a follower of Jesus Christ, how are you supposed to behave? That is an important question, but it is not the only question. I think that is, for you personally, the most important question. But as you think about how it applies to politics, you ask the second question: should we hold the non-Christian world to that same standard? Is there certain moral principles that God says you must do that we should strongly advocate and say, doesn't matter if you follow Jesus or not, you should do this? And if you think about it, and that's what I'm asking you to do, if you think about it, the answer to that question is it depends. I think we can all agree that laws around murder and rape are incredibly important, right? You got this category. And on the other hand, I don't think anybody here in the room is thinking, you know what? You know what should be illegal? Lying. I don't think anybody wants that. Because the next thing you know, you're texting your spouse real quick. See, I'm on the way home, and you have not left the office yet, and you're planning on getting a snack on the way home. You're not almost home. So then you come home, and turns out your spouse is tracking you on the little device that you have. And not only is your spouse mad when you get home, but the police are there. Because not everything that's good should be mandatory, and not everything that God says bad should be illegal. And so how we take these moral codes and apply them in a political context, it depends. And so you're going to have to work that out of kind of like, what do we feel like is the best way to do this? And again, in the context of what is most likely going to get these people reconciled to God. That is what I want. I'm not trying to get people who don't believe in Jesus to live like they do. I want these people to be one to Jesus. And so we have a measure of influence in the way that our society conducts itself, and we should use that, but we should use it for the primary. And then finally, the last question is this: how should we treat people who live or think differently than that? And I've come to some very strong conclusions on a handful of different things. And if I find out that you disagree with me, I'm not going to be that fussed about it. And I'm certainly not going to be fussed about it if someone who doesn't follow Jesus doesn't think that way. I am Jesus' ambassador, and he seemed to love everyone. People who lived very differently than him, who had very significantly different moral codes than he did. People who had different value sets. He forgave the people who killed him. He just had a very different attitude. And he refused to kind of get pulled into their version of the outrage machine. A very common passage. If we were doing this over 4 to 5 weeks, this would have been its own week, where they come to Jesus with this, is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And these two groups that thought very differently about it came together because they thought they could trick Jesus into taking a side. Pick a side. And then the other side can be outraged and condemn you, right? A Fox News host and an MSNBC host come together to Jesus and say, what do you think we should do about people who are in our country illegally? And Jesus is like, what on earth are y'all even on about? I mean, he did give an answer, but he refused their terms. This is the kind of, we should be the people who give to God what is owed to God, and we should give to people what is owed to them. So pay your taxes. He wouldn't play the game. He behaved in he just loved well. And again, there's this really cool passage in Romans 13 that we absolutely do not have any time. I don't even have time for me to even read it now. But there's a thing that he said. I'll say this at the very end. This is start in verse 6 of Romans chapter 13. We'll kind of end just kind of reading this. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, revenue. If respect, respect. If honor, then honor. And all before that, he's just talking about this. You seem to have this attitude. Actually, your government is there to serve you. And if you do good, it's fine. If you do bad, it's a problem. But just live. Be a peaceful person. Respect them. Give them what is owed to them. And you're like, man, he can say that, but he doesn't know. He doesn't know. Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who'd already been imprisoned multiple times for following Jesus. And the emperor, when he wrote this, was a guy named Nero. I don't have a whole lot of time for first century Roman history. I encourage you to Google it and find out his attitude towards Christianity and the kind of person that he was. But Paul says, just be who God has called you to be and give honor and respect to the people that lead you. And I just ended with this question, how's your heart? How's your heart? In the way that you live, in the way that you love, in the way that you approach this, is your heart good? Are you living at peace in the world in which Jesus has told you to be his ambassador? Are you representing him well with a good heart? A good spirit about you? I am both in attitude and heart, actions, beliefs. I am representing Jesus well. And I am on his primary mission. And I'm not going to let a world that is out to divide us distract me that God has not called us to bring more division, but reconciliation. Let me pray. God, I thank you. I thank you for reconciliation. I thank you that we can be reconciled, that most of us here have been reconciled. And God, I pray for those of us who haven't, we're still just trying to figure some things out. God, I pray that we would be, that the death that your son gave for us, that we would accept that our sins would be held against us anymore, and that we can be reconciled to you. And God, as we navigate very contentious, very angry, very divisive waters, that we would be known as thoughtful, loving representatives of your Son, Jesus Christ. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.
Thanks again for joining us on our sermon podcast, and you can learn more about us at thegrovechurch.org. If you go to thegrovechurch.org/connect, there's a form you could fill out. Just let us know that you've been listening. And if you want to dig deeper on some of these topics that we cover in our sermon podcast, or just in other issues of dealing with culture or theology, those kinds of things, you can check out our Cultivate podcast, which is on the same feed, however you found this particular podcast. So again, this is Charlie, the lead pastor at The Grove, and thank you so much for joining us.